My name is Natalie Brooks. I am 31 years old and I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. What you're about to hear isn't just about cancer. It's about abandonment, silence, and how 4 simple words turn the power back in my hands. What would you do if the people who raised you walked away the moment life got hard? If you were sitting in a hospital chair, chemo dripping into your veins, phone in your hand, waiting for your parents to show up and they never did, would you cry? Would you beg? Or would something inside you quietly change forever? Now imagine this. Months later, after the sickness, after the scars, after the strength came back, your father finally calls. And all you give him is 4 words, so calm, so final that he has nothing left to say. Stay till the end because this silence was earned. They say you never forget the moment your life splits into before and after. For me, it wasn't the pain. It wasn't the hospital smell. It was the doctor clearing his throat before he spoke. I remember staring at the wall behind him, a framed photo of a mountain sunrise, peaceful, almost mocking. When he said the word cancer, it didn't feel real at first. It felt like he was talking about someone else, someone older, someone weaker, not me, not a 31-year-old woman who still had grocery lists saved on her phone and half-finished plans for the future. I nodded, asked questions I don't even remember, smiled when I shouldn't have. That's what shock does, it makes you polite when your world is collapsing. When I walked out of that room, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys. A nurse helped me pick them up. A stranger, that detail matters later. I sat in my car for almost 40 minutes before calling my parents. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd soften it, how I'd make it easier for them. Funny how even in that moment, I was still protecting their feelings. My mom answered first. Her voice was distracted, like I'd interrupted something more important. I told her. There was silence. Not the comforting kind. The uncomfortable kind where you can tell the other person doesn't know what to do with your pain. She said, "Oh wow, then are you sure?" As if I'd misheard the oncologist, as if cancer was a scheduling mistake. My dad got on the phone next. He didn't ask how I felt. He asked what stage it was, what the treatment plan would cost, whether I had insurance, practical questions, cold ones. I convinced myself that meant he cared, just in his own way. That night I waited for follow-up calls. They never came. The next few days were a blur of tests, scans, paperwork, and fear that crawled into my chest at night and refused to leave. Everyone tells you to lean on family during times like this. That phrase assumes family lanes back. Mine didn't. The first chemo appointment was the worst, not because of the needle. Not because of the nausea, but because of the empty chair beside me. I told my parents the date, the time. I even said, "You don't have to stay the whole time." I was trying to make it easy for them to show up. My mom texted that morning, "Thinking of you, let us know how it goes." That was it. I watched other patients sit with spouses holding their hands. Adult children bringing blankets for their parents, even friends who didn't know what to say but showed up anyway. And there I was alone, pretending my phone wasn't silent. That's when it hit me. Cancer doesn't just attack your body, it reveals the truth about people. I stopped initiating calls after that. Not out of spite, out of exhaustion. Every unanswered message felt heavier than the chemo itself. I realized something terrifying. I was fighting for my life, and the people who brought me into this world were choosing distance. They said they were overwhelmed. They said they didn't know how to help, but they never asked what I needed. Weeks passed, then months. My hair thinned, my energy vanished. My world shrank to hospital rooms and recovery days, and slowly, quietly, I stopped expecting anything from them. Expectations hurt more than reality. One night after a particularly rough treatment, I sat on my bathroom floor, hugging my knees, shaking from cold sweats. I looked at my phone, no missed calls, no messages. I didn't cry. That scared me more than the diagnosis, because that's when I understood something inside me had shut off, the part that believed my parents would step up when it mattered. Cancer stripped everything down to the truth: who checks in, who shows up, who disappears when your life stops being convenient, and that truth was brutal. By the time my parents realized I wasn't calling anymore, it was already too late. The damage wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet abandonment, the kind that doesn't leave bruises but changes you forever. That diagnosis didn't just tell me I had cancer, it showed me exactly who I could and couldn't count on. And once you see that, you never unsee it. There's a special kind of pain that comes from realizing someone could show up but simply chooses not to. At first, I made excuses for my parents. I told myself they were scared, that cancer is an ugly word and maybe they didn't know how to face it. I convinced myself their absence didn't mean abandonment, it meant confusion. But confusion doesn't last for months. The second chemo cycle came and went, then the third. I stopped counting appointments and started counting side effects instead, metallic taste in my mouth. Bones aching like they belonged to someone twice my age, fatigue so deep it felt stitched into my skin, and still nothing, no surprise visits, no I'm outside texts. No hands squeezing mine when the nurse missed the vein the first time. My mom would occasionally send messages that felt rehearsed. Hope you're doing okay today. Let us know if you need anything. But when I actually did ask for something like a ride home after a long treatment, there was always a reason they couldn't. Too busy, too tired, too much going on, I started to notice something disturbing. They weren't avoiding me, they were avoiding my illness. My pain made them uncomfortable, and instead of sitting with that discomfort, they stepped away from it, from me. One afternoon, I overheard a nurse talking softly to another patient's daughter about caregiver burnout. I almost laughed. Burnout requires effort first. The breaking point came when my oncologist suggested a more aggressive treatment plan. Higher risk, tougher recovery. He asked if I had family support at home. I hesitated. That pause said everything. I told my parents that night. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't cry. I just stated the facts. There was a long silence on the line, and then my dad said something I'll never forget. "Well, you're strong. You'll figure it out." Not "will figure it out, you will." That was the moment I understood I was on my own. After that, their involvement dropped to almost nothing. Holidays passed quietly. Birthdays came and went with late texts and generic emojis. I watched them post smiling photos online, family dinners, weekend trips, normal life continuing as if I weren't fighting for mine. And that hurt more than their silence. Because it meant they had the emotional energy, they just weren't spending it on me. I stopped updating them on my treatments, not as a punishment, but as self-preservation. Every unanswered call chipped away at something I couldn't afford to lose while trying to survive. It's strange how abandonment doesn't always come with a fight. Sometimes it's just distance. Space that grows until it feels intentional. One night, lying awake with nausea rolling through my stomach, I realized I didn't miss my parents the way I thought I would. I missed the idea of them. The version of parents you're supposed to have when everything falls apart, but the real ones, they were choosing absence. That realization hardened something inside me. I stopped expecting warmth from people who kept their coats on around my suffering. I learned to manage appointments alone. I learned how to recover without help. I learned how to be quiet about pain because no one was coming to rescue me, and that's when the dynamic shifted. They assumed I'd always be waiting, always hoping. Always grateful for crumbs of attention. What they didn't realize was that every time they chose distance, they were teaching me how to live without them. By the time they noticed I wasn't calling anymore, I wasn't angry, I was done. Cancer took a lot from me, my energy, my hair, my sense of safety, but it also gave me clarity, brutal clarity. Love that disappears when life gets hard was never solid to begin with. And parents who step back when their child needs them most don't get to step forward later and expect the same access. They didn't walk away loudly, they drifted, and that made the abandonment impossible to deny. There's a point in long-term suffering where you stop asking, "Why me?" Not because you've found peace, but because the question stops mattering. That point came for me somewhere between my 4th and 5th chemo cycle. By then, isolation wasn't new, it was routine. My phone stayed face down most days because checking it only reminded me how quiet my world had become. No missed calls. No just checking in. Silence had settled into my life like permanent furniture, and strangely enough, that's when I started to change. I stopped waiting for people to save me. Mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up exhausted even after sleeping 10 hours. My body felt like it belonged to someone else, someone older, heavier, weaker. On treatment days, I learned how to move slowly, deliberately, conserving energy the way others conserve money. I drove myself to the hospital, parked alone, checked in alone. At first, that loneliness felt sharp like a punishment, but over time it dulled into something else, something quieter, something sturdier. In those chemo rooms, surrounded by strangers fighting their own private wars, I learned how to sit with discomfort without collapsing under it. I learned how to smile politely while my stomach twisted. I learned how to advocate for myself when no one else was there to speak up. No parent stepped in. No one held my hand. So I became my own support system. There was a moment I remember clearly. A nurse struggled to find a vein. She apologized, asked if I wanted to stop and try again later. I shook my head and said, "No, let's finish this." The strength in my own voice surprised me. That's when it hit me I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was adapting. Isolation does something dangerous if you're not careful. It can either break you or force you to build strength in places you didn't know existed. I didn't have the luxury of breaking. No one was coming to pick up the pieces. I learned how to prepare meals when food tasted like metal, how to shower sitting down when standing felt impossible. how to distract my mind during the long nights when pain and fear took turns keeping me awake, and most importantly, I learned how to stop explaining myself. I didn't know updates. I didn't know optimism, I didn't know forgiveness in advance. The quiet gave me space to think, really think about my life before cancer, about how often I'd chased approval. How often I'd tolerated emotional neglect because it came from people I was supposed to love. Cancer stripped that illusion away. When you fight alone long enough, you stop romanticizing relationships that don't show up. You start measuring love by action, not titles. I realized something unsettling but empowering. I was capable of more than anyone ever gave me credit for, including my parents. There were nights I cried, of course. Isolation doesn't mean numbness. It means feeling everything without witnesses, but even those moments passed, and every time they did, I stood back up alone, yes, but standing. By the time my body began responding to treatment, my mindset had already transformed. I no longer felt small. I no longer felt like a child waiting for permission or comfort. I felt solid. People talk about strength like it's loud, like it announces itself, but real strength, the kind forged in isolation, is quiet. It doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't explain, it remembers. And it changes how you respond when the people who abandoned you finally decide they want back in. Because once you've learned how to survive without anyone, you're no longer afraid of losing them. Isolation didn't just make me stronger, it made me untouchable. It's funny how people always reach out after the worst is over, not during the sleepless nights. Not during the treatments that left me shaking, not when I didn't know if my body would hold up another week. They waited until I looked better on paper. I remember the day clearly. My oncologist had just said the word remission, cautiously, carefully, like it might shatter if spoken too loudly. I walked out of the hospital feeling lighter than I had in months. Not because the journey was over, but because I'd made it this far, and that's when my phone rang. My dad's name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a long moment. No panic, no rush, just curiosity. It had been months since he'd called without a reason attached. I wondered what version of me he expected to answer. The scared one, the grateful one, the forgiving one. I answered. His voice sounded different, softer, like someone stepping onto thin ice. He asked how I was doing, as if the past year hadn't happened, as if absence could be erased with tone. I heard from your mom that things are improving, he said. Heard, not asked, not checked in, heard. He talked for a while about how hard it had been for them. About how they didn't know what to do. About how they'd been worried the whole time, just quietly, privately, from a distance that protected them. I listened. That was the first sign he miscalculated. He assumed silence meant weakness. He thought if he explained enough, I'd rush to reassure him, that I'd soften, that I'd say, "It's okay, Dad, I understand." I didn't. He finally paused and said, "I think it's time we move past this." Move past what? The months I fought alone, the birthdays missed, the treatments endured without a single hand to hold. He spoke like closure was a gift he could offer on his timeline. Then came the line he thought would fix everything. "We're still your parents." There it was. That invisible card people play when they think biology outweighs behavior. I felt something settle inside me, not anger, not sadness, clarity. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling to restore access, to make sure the door wasn't closed on him forever. He wanted reassurance that he could step back into my life without consequence. I realized then that this call wasn't about me surviving cancer, it was about them surviving guilt. He waited for my response. I could hear the expectation in his breathing. He thought this was the moment I'd fold, that all the pain would dissolve into relief because Dad finally called, but the person on the other end of the line wasn't the same one he'd left behind. I wasn't fragile anymore, I wasn't desperate, and I wasn't confused about who had shown up and who hadn't, so I let him talk, I let him explain, I let him justify. I let him try to rewrite history in real time, because the more he spoke, the clearer it became. He believed time alone was enough to heal what abandonment broke. When he finally asked, "So where do we stand?" I knew he was ready for forgiveness. He thought this call was the bridge back. What he didn't realize was that the bridge had already burned, quietly, completely, while I was learning how to survive without them. This phone call didn't reopen wounds, it confirmed truths. And as he waited for my answer, I understood something powerful. The hardest part wasn't going to be saying what I felt. It was watching him realize that the control he thought he had was gone. Because the next thing I said would change our relationship forever. There was a long pause after my dad asked, "So where do we stand?" Not the awkward kind, the heavy kind. The kind where you can feel the other person bracing themselves for forgiveness. I could hear his breathing through the phone, steady, hopeful. He thought this was the moment everything snapped back into place, that no matter how long he'd been gone, no matter how absent he'd chosen to be, blood would erase it all. He was wrong. I didn't rush to answer, I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of disappointing him. That fear had burned out somewhere between IV drips and sleepless nights. I thought about the empty chair at chemo, the rides I took alone, the birthdays that passed with silence, and suddenly the words were clear. I said them calmly, no shaking, no anger, just truth. I needed you then, 4 words, that was it. At first, he didn't react. I don't think he understood what I meant. People like him aren't used to being confronted without yelling or tears. Silence confuses them, calm terrifies them. He tried to recover. Well, we're here now. There it was again, now, always now, never then. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue. I didn't explain further, I didn't need to. Those 4 words carried every hospital hallway, every lonely drive home, every night I stared at the ceiling wondering if I'd wake up the next morning. I needed you then. You could hear it when it finally hit him, his breath caught, his confidence drained out of the conversation like air from a punctured tire. Then he did what people do when they realize they've lost control. He tried to rewrite the narrative. He said they didn't think I wanted help. That I sounded strong, that they didn't want to overstep. I almost laughed. Strength is what people assume when they don't want to show up. I let him finish. And then I said something else, quietly, carefully, without cruelty. I survived without you. That's when he went silent, not offended silence, not angry silence, shock. Because that sentence stripped him of the role he thought he'd always have. Parents like to believe they're permanent fixtures in their children's lives, that no matter what they do or don't do, they'll always be needed. He was realizing he tried one last time. His voice cracked just enough to sound sincere. I'm still your father. And that's when I knew the conversation was over, because titles don't heal abandonment, presence does. I didn't argue with him, I didn't say he wasn't my father, I just didn't say anything at all. Silence, when used intentionally, is devastating. After a moment, he said my name, softly. Like he used to when I was a kid and he thought he could fix things just by calling me, but I wasn't that child anymore. I have to go, I said, polite, neutral, final. He didn't stop me. Because there was nothing left he could say. When the call ended, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel victory. I felt closure, the kind that doesn't come from apologies or tears, but from acceptance. I accepted that they had failed me when it mattered most, and I accepted that I didn't need them to acknowledge it for it to be true. Those 4 words weren't meant to hurt him. They were meant to free me. People assume revenge has to be loud, public, cruel. But sometimes the most powerful revenge is becoming someone who no longer needs explanations, validation, or reconciliation. I didn't slam the door, I simply closed it. And for the first time since my diagnosis, I slept peacefully, knowing that I survived cancer, abandonment, and disappointment, and still walked away whole. If this story hit something deep in you, don't scroll away, because chances are you've been there too, waiting for someone who never showed up. If you've ever been abandoned when you needed love the most, tap like so this story reaches someone who feels alone tonight. If you're still healing, subscribe, because the next story might give you the strength you didn't know you had. And if silence became your survival, drop a comment saying I survived. You never know who needs to read that and keep going. You're not weak for needing people. You're powerful for surviving without them.